So before I start, I guess I'll make a disclosure at the insistence of my employer that the opinions that I'm expressing today are entirely my own and in no way reflects the opinions of Citigroup or any of its business affiliates. And anything I say is for entertainment and not investment advice. And I'm not selling anything. Okay, so now that that's done, I don't have any slides because I didn't want to go through an approval process. So this will be just me. And what I wanted to talk about really as a contribution to overcoming adversity is the problem of making savings, converting savings into investments. And worldwide, in the emerging countries as well as in the developed world, there is a very large pool of savings. And I thought it would be interesting to see how science is enabling and will enable better channeling of that saving to investment. And just by way of background, I used to be a particle physicist, the paper and pencil kind, not the experimental kind. And so I have a long-standing interest in these scientific problems. And I think that what I've tried to do over the last dozen years or so is to really calculate risk and to measure it in effective ways that allows better investment decisions. So I hope that's reflected in some of the things that I describe. So what I want to do is I want to do two things. One, I want to set the backdrop by just telling you a small problem. Well, it's kind of a big problem, but anyway, it's a small problem in context with other things that you've heard about. And then I want to describe how technology within the next 10 years may effect a pretty big contribution to changing that. Now, the UN, along with a number of international bodies, has estimates saying that the number of retired people in the world may go up by as much as 500 million people over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, right? So right now, that number is about just under 500 million. When I say retired, I mean 65 plus. And the UN says that they think that that number will be about double that within a decade or more. And furthermore, those people are going to come from all over. China is going to have a graying issue before the United States does, for instance. Certainly Japan. Those are the most immediate ones. But in any case, this has led to a massive wave of savings globally, across the globe, everywhere except the US, of course. It's actually about 7 years since Benjamin Bernanke, who is the US Federal Reserve Chairman, made a speech in which he created the phrase savings glut. And what he meant to say, I guess, roughly speaking, he was saying that, look, it's not our problem alone. It's that the rest of the world is saving too much relative to their investment needs and sending it over here. So we have to build bigger houses and McMansions and buy much bigger TVs because the savings are being thrust upon us. Now, I wanted to take that problem and look at it in a new light, in the light of everything that's happened in the last 3 or 4 years, and examine that again because, in fact, if anything, now the entire industrial world, as well as the emerging world, is engaged in a huge savings binge. Right? Governments across the world are cutting budgets. Certainly corporations are not spending that much money, and individuals are saving much more in preparation for this retirement wave. And just roughly, on the back of an envelope, you can calculate this. 500 million people retiring could add to the savings pool globally just anywhere from, depending on how much you think people need to live on per year, anywhere from 100 trillion to $500 trillion in savings, new savings that need to be deployed. What do I mean by that, to set it in context? Well, so if the GDP of Colombia is nominally, in dollars, about $300 billion, roughly, annually, then the world's GDP, the GDP of the world as a whole, is about $60 to $65 trillion, depending on how you want to count it. To set that in context, the total equity market capitalizations of all the major public exchanges in the world are about $60 trillion. If you add up all the debt in the world that everybody has sold to everybody else, it's about 85 trillion. So that gives you an idea of just what having an additional $100 trillion in savings will mean. and the deployments and the difficulty of deploying that into investments that actually produce returns that people can retire on and live on, okay? So that's the challenge in front of us. And it's a real challenge because in the last few years, not only are funds, global funds and global retirement vehicles chasing after instruments to provide returns to individuals, particularly retired individuals, but now, as you may be aware, central banks are also buying bonds aggressively. So there's this ferocious competition going on. In fact, the major central banks, just the US, the UK, EU, Japan, and China, hold about $15 trillion of bonds. So that sets the stage, okay? Now I want to sort of step out of that sort of background, and if you know about science fiction, so maybe I'll invent the phrase finance fiction. I want to, I want to indulge finance fiction for a few minutes to see how all this change. And I think I think personally a very exciting development, and I learned that phrase just now in that video, infinite computing. I was going to use the word just cloud computing this afternoon, but now I can use infinite computing. I think, so it looks like we can put every book in the cloud ever written, every essay, every piece of music, and it looks like, by social networking standards, every conversation that has ever happened or will happen will also be in the cloud on infinite computing platforms. And not only that, it looks like we have infinite computer processing power. So in other words, the ability to really churn that and see what does it mean. So if you take Medellín, for instance, we don't need to write an insurance policy by treating you as a statistic. We'll be able to write one custom because we'll know so much about you and be able to turn it around and say, okay, this is where he went to school. These were his grades. He failed this class and this class. He was kicked out twice. Okay, his insurance is $2 more than this guy's. So with that level of efficiency, I think it offers some solace to the puzzle of how we're going to deploy that enormous savings pool that's coming. Because for some time now, I've been very intrigued by developments like microfinance and more recently crowdfunding, in case you've heard of that. And what I want to do is go a little bit beyond that, since this is finance fiction, and posit that, in 10 years' time, I think we'll be able to sit here in this room and have a device and press a button and actually have a menu of 500 different investment choices. And I'll take an example. Maybe it'll be a school teacher in a place like Tanzania, where I was born, in Africa. And that school teacher will say, I have an idea for a better school. Okay, or it could be a woman who wants to be a ballerina in Buenos Aires. Okay, or there'll be a whole such choices, and the question for me will be, should I loan $500 or should I invest $500 to this person or this program? Okay, out of this choice of 500, and then proceed to build a portfolio of 500 or more of these to have diversification, and the possibility to do that will be much better than it ever has been, because if you think about the ingredients that go into making a loan to somebody or agreeing to invest in somebody, what do I know about this person? What is their history? What are their credentials? What's their family situation? What's their collateral? And beyond that, they failed in this venture, and that's fine, it closed, but I heard they just took a job as something else, okay, and they're now earning money. How about some of that money be used to pay down what they owe to me? Right now, that is an abstraction, and it's very difficult to follow that. But with the possibility of this infinite computing, that's a triviality. To have all of that information for me, I can now assess, if I'm thinking about lending money to this school teacher in Africa, for me it takes 5 minutes with this infinite computing to see, this is the history of this person. They went to MIT, they got a degree in technology, okay, they know this, and this. This is their history in making payments. And there'll be ancillary service, like a global Moody's or a global credit rating agency, which will be able to populate this database with summary scores about how good this person is, how reliable that person is, how punctual that person is. And it will facilitate, for me, as an investor or as a retired person with savings, a much better record and data on which to make this decision. And, and because I have so much good information on so many possibilities, a much more dynamic set of data on which to diversify my risk. And so you can see that, you've heard of micro-cap and you've heard of small-cap stocks and so on. And so if I may coin a phrase today, I guess this is the ICAP, okay? The individual story. You can start building a portfolio of investments in individual stories, or, maybe I'm going to sound a little hippie, but individual dreams, okay, even, all right? And the nice thing about this is that, I imagined this. I believe from tech people that I know that this will be possible. But I imagine the concept of a universal web passport or a web ID card. Let's call it an e-tag, okay? Which for some people, maybe in rural Tanzania, where I came from, would actually be more useful than having a passport of Tanzania, actually. And if you think about the power of such a device, this passport would allow you to not only to shop at Amazon or wherever else you're doing things, but beyond that, it would allow entities on the web to know about you. Now, that has costs as well, I understand, privacy and so on. So there's got to be on a buy-in basis. But the exciting thing about such a thing is, as an investor sitting here, if you've given money to this person who's becoming a ballerina, and the ballerina thing doesn't work out, and she becomes a lawyer instead, that iTag will carry a record of what she's doing now, and that iTag can be made, in principle, to prompt her new employer to actually make payments and returns on the investment that you made with her. Okay, so you get sort of like a very dynamic model of borrowing and lending, okay, which empowers the people at the other end whose dreams are coming true, and it empowers the savers at this end. And let's not forget that when I say savers, I don't just mean rich people in Beverly Hills. I mean, actually, most of the source of the savings in the world right now is, in fact, the so-called emerging countries. China would be the biggest of them. But Latin America is a net saver, too. So in this sense, it allows the mutual overcoming of adversity between two groups of people whose fates might not ordinarily have been connected. The savers here and the people who are aspirants or people with ideas over here. And I think the previous gentleman said something about the magic 3 billion who are coming online. For my calculations, I only assumed that out of this huge pool of people who are currently, if you like, unwebbed, I only assumed that an additional 1 billion would make an enormous impact. Just to give you a sense of the numbers, I said there was $100 trillion of savings or something like that to work with. Just rough calculations on this 1 billion people being empowered to be affixed with e-tags would actually generate investment opportunities of around $10 to $20 trillion, very conservatively. So you can see that actually it's a quantitatively very relevant and very powerful idea as well. It's not just a qualitative thing. Anyway, with that, thank you very much.